Hello and welcome to the So What podcast, in which political economic analyst JP Landman discusses the issues uppermost in the minds of South Africans. You can find a written version of this content on JP's website, jplandman.co.za. I am Ruda Landman and I am your host. Hello, and as always, a very warm welcome to another episode of the So What podcast, which always accompanies JP's newsletters. This one is dated June 2026, and the heading, The Achilles heel of South Africa, Local Government. We're coming up to elections in, just under 5 months, and it is a problem. Is it possible to summarize the core of that problem?
Yes, I think it is possible to summarize the core. It is basically about people and institutions. Now, whether you allocate 50% to people and institutions or 90-10, that doesn't really matter. It comes down to people, having the wrong people in wrong places. But it also comes down to institutions not functioning optimally. So the people can be fixed in November with the elections, and that's beyond the scope of this note. But the other one, how institutions function, that is what this note will focus on and what I would like to talk about, because that's where the change can come from.
But let's just sketch the background. How many municipalities do we have?
In South Africa at large, we have 257. And they basically carpet the country. The whole territory of South Africa is covered by municipalities. Of the 257, 8 of them are metros or metropolitan councils, basically in 8 big cities. Then there are 44 district municipalities and 205 local municipalities. Now, the difference between local and district is that a district consists of a number of local municipalities. And they deliver services, normally bulk services, bulk water, bulk electricity, for a number of municipalities. And then the local municipality is responsible for service delivery in a particular town. So it's local, district, metro. That's the sequence.
The metros generate about 2/3 of our GDP, and they are home to, roughly 40% of the population.
Correct.
Yet you say most are severely dysfunctional.
Absolutely.
Why doesn't national or provincial government just step in?
That's a very interesting point. And the point is that in terms of our constitution, local government, including metros, enjoy a very particular position and therefore also protection. Local government is not an implementing arm or an administrative agent of national or provincial government. The constitution grants them their own inherent rights of holding elections, of passing legislation and taking decisions. So you can't just barge in and tell them do this or do that. They will tell you to get lost. So when you want to do reform, which is what we're talking about here, you've got to operate within this constitutional constraint. So it's a sphere of government. It's not just an organ of government. That's the status the Constitution gives it.
But you say that there is a redesign of the system in the works.
Absolutely. Government has published a draft white paper for public comment. Comments, I think, closed at the end of May, and it's now in the process of being finalized. Now, we can't talk in this particular podcast about all the proposals in the draft white paper, but essentially they want to redesign the entire system, because I think there's realization that the current system doesn't work, and therefore you have to change it. It's as simple as that.
And that is possible within the Constitution.
And it is possible within the Constitution. So the Constitution puts a constraint on national government, but not a complete ban. And you've got to navigate between these two. So in main, what are the proposals contained in the draft white paper? First of all, to move to a single-tier system outside the metros. In other words, do away with local municipalities and district municipalities. Abolish that, move to a one-tier system. Secondly, move away from the one-size-fits-all model, which we currently have, and allocate different powers to different municipalities depending on their ability to handle functions and to handle responsibilities. So you take, for example, two national functions. The one is housing, the other one is police. In terms of the white paper, it would be possible to delegate some of those functions to strong enough local municipalities. So do away with one size fits all.
Who will determine that?
And well, that'll have to be a process of negotiation and talking. Indeed, you can't just sit in Pretoria and say you are capable and you're not. So factors like population, income, capacity, and so on will all have to be.
The way they handle their budget.
The way they handle their budgets and so on will all have to be considered. I think the most important suggestion in the draft white paper is that all trading services of municipalities, metros and municipalities, must be ring-fenced. Now, what are the trading services? It's water, it's electricity, it's sanitation and waste removal, the things for which municipalities charge a fee. Ring-fence those operations. Now, what does ring-fencing mean? It simply means that the money, first of all, goes back into those services. You first use it for maintenance, you use it for capital expenditure, you use it to appoint the right people, qualified people who can run those services. And then whatever money is left over after that, that can go into the general pool of municipal income. At the moment, it's the other way around. At the moment, all that money goes into a general pool and it's spent on all kinds of things.
Since 2016, we've seen coalitions in more and more of these local governments. And often that seems to be the problem. Is anything happening there?
We have, of the 257 municipalities and metros, 66 are run by coalition governments. And as you point out, since 2016, but particularly since 2021, the last time we had local government elections, our experience of coalitions has not been a happy one. They fall apart, there's constant bickering, people bring motions of no confidence in mayors and speakers, and there's a constant change of leadership. So at the moment there is legislation in Parliament, it's going through the parliamentary processes to regulate how coalitions must be run. And I think there are a couple of important changes. The first one is, at the moment you have to call the first council meeting and constitute a council within 14 days after an election. Now that's a very short period of time. So that's being lengthened to 30 days to enable parties to negotiate a coalition agreement. That coalition agreement must be in writing, and it must specify specifically what the coalition government would like to achieve in the next 5 years of their term for which they've just been elected. And the thinking is that you want to move parties from an informal political agreement to more of a rules-based order. Now, this has been used by the DA and the IFP in KwaZulu-Natal in coalitions where they share power. And it seems to have worked, not 100%, but it seems to have worked reasonably well. It does move parties away from political agreements to rules, which helps.
And does it also tie them into the whole 5 years? They can't decide the week after tomorrow, we don't like you anymore, we're going to choose a new partner.
Yes, in a way it does, because there's a limitation on the number of times that no confidence motions can be brought against a mayor or a speaker or a member of the mayoral committee. As we know, in the last 5 years particularly, motions of no confidence have been abused to a huge extent to keep on changing the leadership as parties swing from one alliance to the other. So the idea is to stop that by having a ban on, or a restriction rather, on no confidence motions. But that doesn't mean that you can't get rid of anybody. There is a provision in the legislation that councils can appoint an independent panel to consider whether such a motion should serve. A little bit equivalent to the impeachment committee process that we now have in the National Parliament. Same kind of story. And lastly, there are transparency requirements for council meetings, regulating when meetings must be held, and also giving the power to provincial members of the executive committee, provincial ministers basically, to intervene in local government meetings where things don't go well. Particularly when, for example, a speaker would block meetings from being held. Then the MEC can intervene and can change the arrangement. So it gives us specific authority to the province.
What happened to the idea of a minimum threshold?
Yeah, unfortunately, the idea has fallen by the wayside. The original proposal was that parties must achieve 1% of the vote before they can serve in the council. I think it's a very good idea. It would have cut down the number of small parties in councils considerably. Even in a stable council like Cape Town, you would have seen quite a dramatic reduction in the number of parties. So that would have been good for stability and consistency. But that has fallen by the wayside, and it's not part of the current legislation which is now before Parliament.
And that's because the DA and the ANC couldn't come to an agreement.
Yeah, they came to an agreement around the 1%, so that was easy, that was done. But then the ANC wanted to put forward, or did put forward, a proposal that where one party doesn't have the majority, then the executive of the council, the executive of the local government, must comprise on a proportionate basis from all the parties in the council. Now, what that would mean is that if you get, say, 40% of the vote in Johannesburg, that's not 50, then you must share the executive positions with MK, with the EFF, and with all other parties. Now, that's not workable. So for that reason, the idea was then dropped and the 1% died in the process.
Water has been an enormous problem. And you're saying that there has been a response, that water as such is actually forcing a change?
Yeah, it's a replay for me of what we saw with load shedding. Load shedding from, when was it, 2019, a little bit earlier, actually forced the country to change the way in which our electricity system operates. And we've seen dramatic changes in electricity, and we've now had no load shedding for more than a year. Now, the same kind of fundamental reform, I think, is spurred on by the water crisis. And it comes out in basically two big reforms. The first one is licensing, and the second one is ring fencing. And both these reforms are being driven by the Department of Water and Sanitation with Operation Vulindlela, which, as you know, is the joint National Treasury Presidency initiative to effect reform in the country, in the economy. And they're driving these two changes of licensing and ring fencing.
So what is the changes with regards to licensing? What does that entail?
At the moment, there are amendments before Parliament to the Water Services Act. And what the amendments say is that a municipality has got two designations. The one is it's a Water Services Authority. And the authority is responsible for providing water to its citizens in its area. It must set the policy and it must set the price. Then there's a water service provider, which is responsible for operating things. That's how it currently stands. But part of how it currently stands is that the municipality perform both those functions. They're the authority and they're the provider. What the amendments to the Water Services Act are doing is to split those two. And to say to be a water services provider, you need a license. And the license will stipulate minimum requirements. And if you don't, as a provider, meet those requirements, you will lose your license. The license can be taken away and given to somebody else. And that somebody else can be somebody outside the municipality. It's a very, very important change. It looks like a small administrative thing. It is not. It basically breaks the monopoly hold that municipalities have had for as long as we had municipalities, that they are the sole providers of water. You break that monopoly. And that opens the door for private sector companies, for profit and not for profit, to come in and to do the water provision function. So the municipality remains responsible for price and for making sure that all citizens get water. But the provider is responsible for maintenance, for making sure the water flows in the pipes, that the taps work, and that the money is collected.
Has it been done? Has it been tried?
Only not as a result of these changes, no. But we do have two places in the country, two municipalities of the 257, where an outside party, in both cases a private company, are responsible for water delivery. That's in KZN on the Dolphin Coast at Belito, and in Mpumalanga in Bombela. And in both those two municipalities, you've seen a dramatic improvement in water delivery by those private providers. So, yes, there are examples, and I think the success of those two examples tell you that this system, if it's applied nationally, can make a huge, huge difference.
Okay, so that's licensing. The other change you said was ring fencing.
Correct. And as I've already explained, it's about forcing all municipalities to take their trading services, water, electricity, sanitation and waste removal, those three, for which they charge a fee to ratepayers, to ring fence that income and separate it from general municipal income, but also from general municipal expenditure. That's the important part. Now, ring fencing can really make a big difference to the way our local governments operate. This is also in line, it's now being proposed by legislation, but it's also in line with what is suggested in the draft white paper. Now, linked to that is, I think what is important to note is what National Treasury has done in respect of the 8 metros we have in the country. They've put together a 54 billion rand incentive, financed by local and foreign money, over a 6-year period. And what they basically say is, if you as a metro can prove to us in Treasury that you've ring-fenced your operations, you run them as a commercial operation, you've appointed qualified people, we will allow you to get some of this 54 billion for infrastructure and investment. You've got to match it rand for rand. Every rand that you contribute, we will give you a rand, and the money must go to infrastructure upgrades and renewal. This can make a huge difference to municipal infrastructure in the 8 metros.
So they are being offered a huge carrot. Is there a stick in the works as well?
There are sticks being employed, absolutely. It's a process of carrot and sticks. And what are the sticks? The main one is the National Treasury is withholding what is called the equitable share. Now, what is the equitable share? It's simply a formula in the Constitution to make sure that a part of the national tax take is paid over to municipalities, also to provinces, but we're now talking about municipalities. Now, this year, for example, municipalities will get 110 billion rand from the national tax pool, so to speak. And what Treasury has started doing is to say, if you owe money, if you as a municipality owe money, we're not going to pay this equitable share over to you. You must first settle your debts, and then you can have the check. At the end of 2024, there were, I think, 34 municipalities that were punished in this way. By the end of December 2025, that number is increased to 75. So clearly, Treasury is very willing to yield this big stick. And it looks as if it is curbing the amounts of money that municipalities just don't pay. You would have noticed that the city of Johannesburg has been in the news lately, with the Minister of Finance saying you can't go ahead with a 3-year wage agreement with your unions about salaries because it's unfunded, and we're not going to give you equitable share unless you revoke that. Now, the Minister and the Council are still fighting, and we will see where that goes. But it illustrates the same kind of willingness to withhold the equitable share from local governments who don't manage their finances properly.
Just as an aside almost, what about the other way? There are also government entities who owe money to municipalities.
Very important point. Across the country, government entities across the country owe 28 billion to local municipalities. And that obviously is a big amount of money. So if you can get all government entities who is funded by the taxpayer to actually pay their debt to local municipalities, it'll make a big difference. But I must also point out, local municipalities owe about 161 billion rand, mainly to Eskom and to water boards, but also to other creditors. But against that 161 billion is 467 billion, which is owed to municipalities. 28 billion of that, as we discussed, are organs of state. 100 billion, more or less, are private sector companies. And then 335 billion are private households who owe money to municipalities. So there are two sides to this story. Municipalities owe money, but they also owed a lot of money. Now, households or businesses owing money to municipalities is quite often a function of poor collection. And if you can up your collection and your taking in your debt, then you can solve a lot of these problems.
And enforcement.
Enforcement, that's really the word that I was looking for.
What about the people, the individuals? Are they being held responsible at all?
No, not yet. What we have at the moment is that the Department of Water and Sanitation has laid criminal charges against municipalities for not meeting their water or particularly sewage and sanitation minimum standards. And what we found is that the courts have levied fines from 10 million to as much as 200 million. Now, of course, that fine must be paid by the municipality, which again means the taxpayer. But there's a nice case that recently played out in Knysna, where the municipality was fined 10 million rand after they pleaded guilty to various counts of sewage spills into the Knysna estuary. So they got a 10 million rand fine, suspended for 5 years, on the condition that they spend 10 million rand on clean up and fixing the situation in a shorter period than 5 years. But they were also given an order by the court that they must spend 630 million over the next 5 years on infrastructure and environmental rehabilitation. And thirdly, they must contribute 500,000 rand towards better law enforcement by the province on environmental issues. So that's quite a hefty clap that the court gave to the Knysna municipality. And I think we can expect to see much more of that. And
it's quite an intricate sentence, if I can put it that way, that it's not just pay a fine.
Indeed.
Other things that need to happen.
Steps must be taken to improve the situation that led to the fine in the first place. One must, of course, ask the question here, is it possible that in due course we can change the law so that the municipal councillors and officials who are responsible for the neglect are held personally responsible? I would like to see that develop. It's not the position yet, but it can happen. Recently in the Northwest Province, the Auditor General held a civil servant responsible for 4.6 million rand, which was not collected by the municipal official. And the Auditor General said, you've got to pay it personally. So that's the kind of stick that we need to instill discipline.
So in summary, this Achilles heel, what is your so what?
I think the first biggest so what is that everybody now accepts that the worst problem we have in the country is that local government is not functioning and it's got to change. It can't carry on like this. That's number one. Secondly, there is a wholesale reorganization that is being proposed in the draft white paper on which the public have now had the opportunity to comment, and that will probably become the policy over the next while. So the new governments, local governments that will be elected in November, will increasingly operate in a very different system from the one that we've seen the last 25, 30 years. There are big changes. Thirdly, the fact that we're going to ring fence water, electricity and waste income and manage that money differently can make a very, very big change in real life. The other big consequence that's flowing from ring fencing and particularly licensing is that we break the monopoly that local governments have enjoyed on delivering those services. People want to work with a model where every household must look after itself. Well, that obviously can't work. What you need is for a non-municipal provider to step in and do what the municipality is supposed to do. And that becomes possible under this arrangement. Then there's also legislation to force coalition governments to operate with more responsibility. Whether it'll have that effect, we will see. But it's certainly a reaction to the abuses and neglect that we've seen in the last 5 years. And that reaction is good. But in the end, Ruda, I have to say, you can reform the institutions and you can write laws, but it's equally important that voters in November elect the right people. And that will, of course, vary from municipality to municipality. But it's very important that people step up, make sure who they want to vote for, and cast their votes for people who can help to improve the system.
What is the most important characteristic that you would look for in a candidate?
Somebody that is really willing to serve the citizens in an honest and diligent manner. He must have something in his track record to indicate that he's an honest worker and he's a conscientious worker. That, for me, will determine whether I would vote for him or not.
Thank you very much. We will speak soon. Thank you for listening to the So What podcast. If you enjoy this content, please don't forget to leave a review and a rating, and please consider subscribing so you don't miss any future episodes. Also, tell your friends. Remember, you can find a written version of all JP's content at jplandman.co.za.